First, he had a tick bite that caused his eye to swell, and then he had it's around his eyes. So he was on anti-inflammatory and antibiotics. Now the anti-inflammatory's gone, the eye's fine, and he just has his antibiotic to take.
So Teresa,
poor guy.
You guys are now live.
All right, we are live. Welcome, everybody. We're all here and accounted for, so we'll call the meeting to order. And good evening. And we have with us tonight Vice Chair Nancy Lipson, Commissioner Terry Bond, our staff liaison Teresa Wellman, and our very, very special guest once again, Eric Wyshynski. So thank you, Eric, for once again taking the time to meet with us. Nancy and Terry, you should have been in receipt of an agenda in minutes, so we can get that housekeeping out of the way. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
I second.
All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Okay, and then you should have received the minutes from the last meeting in May. Is there a motion to approve the meeting minutes?
So moved.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, very good. Yeah, we did learn in our Robert's rules that we don't need a second anymore for small
That's right. I
groups.
remember
That's
that.
true.
We're gonna make
After I
that-
seconded the first one,
Yeah.
I remembered that.
It makes sense, you know?
Yeah.
So Eric, congratulations on getting out the draft goals and metrics. I'm sure that was an undertaking, and
Yeah, thank you.
we were happy to see that posted. And I think, the materials, we've all taken a look at the material, and really what we wanted to do tonight, to, sort of save you the task of giving any kind of presentation. We wanted to just use this time to sort of have a dialogue with you, if we could. Specifically centering around the municipal growth, land use, and housing goals, because those seem to be the ones most pertinent to the work of this body, correct?
Yes.
Not missing anything there, right?
Yeah.
And there did seem to be several, what do you call them, action items, and goals and metrics that related directly to zoning, either amending zoning or reviewing zoning, or, some sort of reference to the zoning. And so, what I attempted to do was sort of take a look at those and group them. And hopefully you're in receipt of what Teresa had forwarded to you earlier, which is sort of a list of 6 types of questions about, zoning as it relates to the comp plan. Does that work for you if we just kind of just start the conversation there, or did you want to do any kind of intro or?
Well, I would just say, it sounds like the group here sounds to be pretty well versed in the format that we've set up for the draft goals and metrics and recommended actions. But anybody that's watching from home, I just hope that word has gotten to you that we have this this new website up, and it's easily accessible from the main page of the city of Annapolis. The main website landing page for the city of Annapolis has a link at the bottom for a comprehensive plan, and you can just basically click on that and find your way pretty straightforwardly to this. And we're looking to get input on these draft materials through early August. So I expect that we're going to be continuing to have conversations like this with other groups all through July, and just trying to gather as much input as possible. And we're really going to be pretty organized in how we log the input we receive, and make sure that we can kind of address everything. So that was my just plug for the process.
Eric, if you want, I can share my screen and show the website if it helps.
Sure, that'd be great. Yeah.
Can I also just for the audience and for us to go back a little bit, and I'm sorry, I don't have it in front of me, but there were 2 specific, I guess, goals dealing with affordable, trying to bring down to make housing more affordable. I can't remember the terminology you used. Do you remember that? It was
Um, there's probably more than two. I mean, well,
I guess
in ter-
major bringing
yeah.
percentages down of income restricted, people that didn't have enough income. I forget the terminology.
Attainable?
No, it wasn't. I don't think it was I think
No.
it had actually to do with the percentage of people who were. All right, let me look it up before I make a complete fool out of myself.
Yeah, and Terry, we may hit on that when we go through, because I think we probably picked up on that, because there were several references to affordable. And I guess I should also,
But see,
okay,
that was my issue, Kathy. It didn't
here's
say
the
affordable
website.
housing. It had very specific terminology.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, we use the terms, for low income household, moderate income households. There's probably a few references to workforce, and there's references to that 80 to 120% income bracket. I don't believe that we have any reference, for the low income, and there's reference to moderate income dwelling units. But
And the
I think
missing middle.
missing middle, is that 80 to
Missing middle is-
120%. But I don't think we refer to income brackets other than that one.
Right.
We would say low income, and we're kind of, we're not that specific about that. We could clarify that.
Well, I'll you guys go on, and I'll look up what I was talking about.
Okay.
It doesn't
Okay.
fit in any of those categories, at least in my mind. I'm sorry.
But this is the website, Eric, right?
Yeah, that's right. And so, we have a bit of an overview of where we are in the process with the comprehensive plan. And then if, there's a link below that paragraph where you can, where it takes you to the new website, essentially. This is just our landing page for the comprehensive plan, just general information. And then this is the web page that has all of the current draft material that we're looking for input on. And so we provide some overview of the structure of the comprehensive plan and the schedule. And, for those who've been involved in the process so far, it's all very familiar. But there's links to the 8 element sections of the comprehensive plan. And, I just reiterate all the time that I know there's a lot of folks out there eager to see sort of the plan. This is not the plan. This is the most substantial component of the plan. Our recommendations, our goals and recommendations, and we're continuing to work on the plan document and want to release a draft of that in the early fall. So all the comments we receive to this material are going to feed into that. And that's kind of how we're doing it. It seemed to make most sense to get feedback on this material now, and so we could refine things. But the rest of what goes into the plan are, narrative passages related to our existing conditions, assessment, photographs, maps, other graphics, and charts, and last thing I want to say is that all of the goals, all the recommended actions that we're sharing through this website will ultimately be put into a implementation type chart, which identifies them as short-term priorities, midterm, long-term actions, who's responsible for implementing them, what kind of level of investment are we talking about for these, just relatively, are they related to other actions? In other words, does something have to happen before for this to be implementable? And so that's where we're headed with this. We're not putting them in that format yet, but that's kind of where we would go. So it's more clear about how we actually move forward.
Okay. All right. Very good. And I guess I should also preface and clarify that, the reason, we thought it made sense to zone zone in on zoning, to focus in on zoning specifically is because, this commission has been tasked with looking at Anne Arundel County's recently passed workforce housing legislation and reviewing and considering something similar for adoption in this city per the terms of the consent decree that the city has entered into with HACA. So we've been given that very, very specific task. And, again, notice many references to zoning in the comp plan, and thought this is just a perfect opportunity to, given that we have that immediate task in front of us, to dig into that, sort of get into the weeds with you on that a little bit, if we could. I think it'd be very helpful. And there's a lot to this. So there's a lot of other conversations I know we all like to have about other matters as they relate to housing in the comp plan. But I mean, for the sake at least of this next conversation, if we could focus in on the zoning, that would be helpful, I think. So. Again, you broke this into 3 goals: municipal growth, land use, and housing. And there was some overlap. There was some duplication of some of the goals, I guess, or the action items within each of them. But municipal growth, goal 3, wanted to ask you about that one, where you talk about utilizing zoning districts to identify housing priority areas where access to transit, jobs, and amenities are available. So can you just talk about that a little bit? I mean, are you thinking in terms of identifying entire zoning districts and designating them as housing priorities? And if so, what does that really mean? What are you envisioning by that?
Yeah, I should first preface this by saying that we're actually going to be working with one of our comprehensive planning consultants, Stantec, on a focused zoning study that's going to start in July. As it's I want to say it's part of the comprehensive plan, but we're actually their scope will take them up through writing actual zoning legislation. So the idea is to actually study a way of creating more focused zoning districts that are more specific to type of outcomes we want. Just, they'll be ultimately most likely form-based zones, meaning they focus on the look and quality character of the buildings and spaces around the buildings, as much as what happens inside them. And the idea is that working with this consultant, we're going to develop these new zoning district types. And I would say one of the main outcomes we hope, not just to come up with these new zones, but is to consolidate some of our 31 zones that we have in the city, which is excessive, in my opinion, for the size of the city. It's I would certainly acknowledge we have a complicated city for the size that we have and population that we have, but I think there are certainly ways of simplifying our zoning code and doing it in a way that will yield a process that's more predictable and more. I think we can improve the zoning code in a way that lets community members know what's going to happen, to a finer degree than they currently do, but also gives potential property owner, developers, and property owners, enough flexibility. So that's kind of where we're going. But so with the housing priority type, so we took a stab at developing, in trying to think about the scope for working with this consultant. We kind of took a stab at what could some of these new zoning areas be about. and one of them, it seemed, should maybe be about housing priority, meaning where are the areas of the city where additional density might make sense. Granted, there are a lot of places in the city where density does not make sense. There probably are some areas where it does, and we could start to speculate on what might contribute to that. Places that are close to transit, close to parks and open space, that can accommodate a lot of people, like Truxton Park, places that, are highly walkable, and essentially just have infrastructure already in place to service, additional households. And so, that's kind of the initial approach to thinking about housing priority areas. So I would say there are existing multifamily locations in the city, like the Admiral Farragut Apartments on Hilltop Lane, some of the properties, Hackup properties, for example, Eastport Terrace and Harbor House. That's a unique site that we don't talk a lot about in our comp plan recommendations currently, but we may add to that because it's a site that we're going to be working with HACA to plan. But these are places that, if you look at their current layout, they have a lot of surface parking. They have a lot of kind of undefined common areas between the buildings that, could be more defined. If the open space amenity areas were, were more defined, it's not hard for me to imagine that there's, some more units in these places. And so that's kind of the idea. Just being very strategic about where it makes sense to put additional housing.
Okay, so yet
Yeah.
to be determined, and
Yet to be determined. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
All right, I didn't know if you already had in your mind kind of.
We need to do a lot more study about and modeling. I mean, that's probably going to be a big part of this, is trying to understand what adding additional unit to some of these locations would do. And that's something that'll be part of the scope. So yeah.
And you had talked before about having a consultant help you identify the mixed use area. So that would be done in tandem with that as well, right?
Yeah. I mean, that's, thanks for bringing that up, because that's more of the point of departure for the zoning update is that there are a variety of zones in our current zoning code that in the commercial categories, like the B1, B2, B3, and the P and the PM. Those are like our primary zones that we're targeting for update. I would say, that they don't preclude residential development currently, but well, not all of them, but we could be way more strategic in what they allow, and I think the encouraging mixed use development is the way to go. Just kind of we're not gonna. I don't foresee us, messing with some of the residential zones, but if we're trying to add mixed use, I think it's the commercial zones that we're going to be looking at most closely. And I think we talked a lot about the reasons why mixed use is being in our last meeting. Yeah. So.
Yeah.
Okay.
Can I just also say, I mean, the thing with the housing priority is that I talked a bit about, adding density, but the real reason those types of zones would be, considered within essentially a mixed use approach is that those are places where there could be some modest provision of retail, close by within the development. If you can imagine, like 10% of their square footage is for retail conveniences that might be relevant, compatible or relevant to the people who live there. And it's a lot of this with a lot of the emphasis on mixed use is it's trying to be more efficient with the landmass of the city, which is very constrained, and we're trying to limit how people move around this, the degree to which people have to jump in their car to get places. If we can put things closer to where people live, it improves our mobility and limits congestion, and limits our emissions. And so that's really the kind of holistic way of thinking about it, I guess.
All right, and then in that same goal, there's reference to incentivizing duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, or the way it says remove barriers in the zoning code to create, additional options such as those. So when you think about that, is there any place where you're thinking you don't want to see it, or the places where you think that it makes the most sense?
I think, well, so there was a time in Annapolis when those types of housing were more prolific. I mean, you could still walk around it, lots of Annapolis and see great examples of duplexes and triplexes and fourplexes. And, and today our zoning code does not allow many of those. You have to really get into the R3 zone before you can see some provision for those. So what if I were to crystal ball where we're headed with this, in the zoning study, it's going to kind of look at how to allow for those types of units. I think there'll be certain conditions that we need to have to make those to have those make sense. I think there are areas of the city in the R2 zone where those would be compatible. It might be, you may have to be very surgical about it and not just cast a broad brush over the city. But I think we're going to have to look at lot area and and character of communities and understanding. I think we're going to have to provide guidelines similar to what we have for our site standards today. When things are reviewed by current planning, I mean, they have standards that they use to make sure things are compatible in the city. And I think we're going to need guidelines similar to that, because that's just, I mean, understandably, that's going to be a concern from a lot of folks. I think it's not hard to find examples of, like I said, in the city today, where duplexes and triplexes fit really compatibly with single family homes. But I recognize some people may need some more convincing of that. So I think what we're planning on doing in our comprehensive plan is having kind of a gallery of examples from Annapolis today that show just how these housing types currently exist in harmony, and just, I think there's a lot of education that needs to happen about that. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm hearing like surgical and being very definitive about where it could go and how it would go, right?
Yeah. I think it's going to have to be. We're going to have guidelines, I think so.
Okay, and then in the spirit of moving on, so land use, your goal one there makes reference to compatibility for new and existing developments. Amending the zoning code for better compatibility between new and existing. I guess, could you kind of expand upon that a little bit and, just help explain exactly your thoughts there?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oops. Sorry. So it is, some of this piggybacks onto what I was just saying. But we want to encourage, growth in the city is going to happen through infill redevelopment of sites. I mean, we're a city that's largely built out, but that doesn't mean that we don't have properties in the city that are all functioning to the greatest degree, and and performing well. And I mean, there's a whole variety of properties in the city that have development that is, might include a small building with a large surface parking lot that has no stormwater treatment facility, and just a kind of a single use that could be serving its neighbors better. And so, the idea is to, with our zoning update, is to basically identify these places, these zoning types that are generally, I think what we're talking about is mixed use and are more specific to the context that they're in. So one example would be the commercial area of West Annapolis, where you have the Grawls supermarket, you have a lot of professional offices, and a few other retail, on Annapolis Street, and is a great kind of neighborhood main street. So in that area, the idea would be to have zoning types that are specific to the context they're in. So I mean, we actually, I'm actually using a specific example here because we did a master plan for West Annapolis that we're wrapping up. We essentially finished it, and we're just making a few final changes. But the big idea there is that, so currently we have zoning in that commercial district that is, we have three zoning types. We have a PM, I think we have a B1, I think we have B2, and it looks like a little puzzle if you look at the zoning map, and it doesn't really relate to the geographic context of the I actually have to hold that thought for a second. I do have to move where I am, so I'm gonna put myself off. I'll be right back.
Poor guy.
He's in it. Did you say he's in his car?
Yeah, yes. Apparently, like, maybe he's being told to move on. He must be parked illegally or something.
Yeah. And why is he in his car?
I don't know.
I'm back. Yeah, I didn't plan my hours very well here. That's why I'm here. But so yeah, I mean, the idea with the sort of context-based zoning is that we take stock of the assets that are there. So, in the West Annapolis example, you have this established neighborhood. You have a really important neighborhood main street in Annapolis Street. You have Raoul Boulevard, which is a major thoroughfare gateway into the city. And the way of, in the master plan, the way we restructured the zoning is by saying, well, everything close to Annapolis Street is more of the scale of Annapolis Street today, and you kind of build up a little bit as you get closer to Raoul Boulevard. And so we're not talking about getting that big. I mean, maybe we get up to 4 stories on Raoul Boulevard, but that would be the extent of it. And so the idea is that, and the types of uses change as well, where things might be more retail focused closer to Annapolis Street, and they kind of shift in terms of use, where you might have more office and residential closer to Raoul Boulevard, and more residential and retail closer to Annapolis Street. And and so the zones are really tailored to their context. They're not if you look at the zoning code today, there are examples of that in parts of Annapolis where we wanted to value the context. Downtown Annapolis, we have these zones, the C1, C2, C1A, C2A. I mean, and those are all oriented towards preserving the character of the historic district, and so we also have neighborhood conservation zones. There's one on West Street, there's one in Eastport. Those also are very much tailored to preserving the character of those areas. And so the idea is, well, what about the rest of the city? And we have an MX zone for Inner West Street, but we could take that type of idea and adapt it to other parts of the city. And so you get these infill redevelopments that should be more compatible with what's around them. We provide more guidance to the potential developer. So, I don't have the specifics, but that's just kind of the idea.
Can I ask a real world question here, though?
Sure.
And I think this implies also to what your long-term plans would be along Route 2 as well, where Little is and now everything. You have an important community asset that I actually saw an early version of that plan. I don't know what it looks like now, but I'm not sure Growls was in it.
The
grocery store, which is
it is.
Yeah,
it is. No, it is.
It scared a lot of people when that plan came out. That because the grocery store is not small scale retail, and maybe fitting that in a mixed use development. How do you do that? I guess that would be my question.
Well, it's still very much in that West Annapolis master plan. And we heard that, on the
you
first.
Heard that a lot.
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty loud and clear that, people like having a grocery that's in the neighborhood.
That's part of, but that's really important. People can walk there. It is.
There's great precedents, in cities all over today, where a grocery store is integrated into a mixed use development. And dare I say it's an urban thing. I mean, it's just it's on the ground, in the simple rendering that's in the West Annapolis master plan. The Growls is essentially still in the same location. We've just sort of added some residential above it, and we've filled up the parking lot with some additional uses, and we put a parking garage behind the shopping center, and that's it's pretty well integrated, and so a lot of that is frankly just about using the surface parking lot better, and accommodating the parking in different ways. So
I understand the design, of course. I guess, and I'm a little off topic here, but that would be a perfect housing over Growls would be perfect to put in some workforce affordable housing up there. If you can, and I don't know who owns the shopping center, but if you can get by, it would be a perfect kind of case study to try and make work. But just putting that out there, because that's going to be a lot of people are going to be afraid of losing the grocery store. So from what I understand, the grocery store, its current form isn't going anywhere anytime soon. I think the folks that own it don't have any plans to change. They put in some investment recently in the interior, but I think
so there's, if you look at that site, if you look at the site at Solomon's Island Road, Old Solomon's, that shopping center, which is partly in the county today, but probably makes sense if to be all in the city ultimately. Those are sites where, yeah, I mean, you could have, you could definitely support more workforce housing, and whether that's through a provision that, you know, I mean, we obviously the moderately priced dwelling unit policy would apply, but I was really in the idea that we talked about last time about amending the plan development guidelines. I thought was a really good idea, and I spoke with Dr. Nash about that as well, and I mean, and some other folks in our current planning. I mean, I think it's I don't think it's a crazy idea. I think, you know, I mean, I think there's so much flexibility that comes with the plan development that it's for, you know, there's a lot of smaller projects that are plan developments too, and they may not have the same ability, but I think, you know, you get over a certain threshold, I think that there's more ability to have that kind of provision. So that's, there's a couple recommendations in this draft that's on the website that came right out of that last conversation we have. That was one of them. And then the other was that the point that you guys made about the you know, the allowance for the permitting the multifamily development in zones where it's currently a special exception. So that
Right.
that also I thought made a lot of sense.
Yeah, actually, I did want to ask you about that. So that's a housing goal. It's your first housing goal.
Yeah.
And we had actually, because the county allows it as a conditional use.
We don't have condition. That was the one thing I had to. We don't have
That's-
conditional uses. Yeah.
Right,
That's
that's what I wanted to ask
special
you about.
exception, I guess. Yeah.
Well, so that's what I wanted to, I wanted to kind of have a conversation about that. So, is there a merit to creating, you know, conditional use standards rather than allowing it as permitted?
But let me, Eric, I want to ask, you say you don't have a conditional use. Because back in the day, conditional uses and special exceptions were kind of similar.
Yeah, I think I would consider our special exception a
But
condition. It's just terminology, maybe.
But I think you have uses that are only allowed under certain conditions, maybe footnotes in the text or text. So although it's not called a conditional use, it's a use that's only allowed under specific situation, under certain things occur. I think you have some of those. I might be wrong, but I thought I saw some on the ordinance. Like you can do A if you have these things in place.
Yeah, I think you might be right. I think there are some examples of that. But it's not as prolific as, you know, it's, so we don't use that term conditional, but I guess maybe in terms of how things work conditionally. Yeah.
Part of the condition would be the affordability of what's being developed, as opposed to multifamily that's not affordable, right? So that would be one of the conditions.
That's a good point. Yeah.
I actually think that's a definition. Affordable housing would be a certain thing, and you're allowed to do that if you meet these specific things. I think. I mean, there's different ways of doing it, but
Okay.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we're all saying the same. We're all thinking the same thing. It's just how do we get at it? Okay.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, we you know, we have the moderately priced dwelling unit, which I think is probably a fair, you know, definition of what we're talking about here. That's you know, that's, I believe that's what we have in our code in terms of a definition of affordable, you know, just what would be, you know, allowed.
What would be considered?
What would be considered, yeah, affordable, right? Exactly. But that's an interesting idea. I mean, that because what we have is we have a classification that's, you know, subject to standards, and that typically means site standards, you know, character related. which means that it goes through our current planning division, and they you know, they put a pretty critical eye to the project and uphold the standards that are in the code. But that's another way of addressing it, perhaps, is, you know, that those standards, it would probably be, I have to, you know, I would want to discuss this obviously with current planning, but there might be something there too.
I mean, that most directly matches up to what the county did.
Okay.
You know, I mean, that, you know, and thinking about and looking at the county legislation, I mean, that's how they went about doing it, is they did it as conditional use.
Okay.
Let me go back real quick to one of the land use goals. Well, actually, it is goal 1. You say simplify the zoning code. It seems like everything we talk about is not simplifying; it's making it more complicated. But
Yeah.
I mean, what do you think? Simplifying the zoning code so it's easier to develop infill projects. What are you thinking
Okay.
of there?
I mean, there's some truth to it. I mean, we're not by simplifying, we're not dumbing this down. I mean, it's still sorry. So there's still a level of complexity here that, I mean, I think we're not gonna be able to, in terms of simplifying, what we're talking about is simplifying the number of zoning districts that we have. So that's sort of like the first level of simplification, you know, that we don't have
Essentially
31
reducing it.
districts. Right.
Simplifying.
Yeah.
Reducing the number of zoning districts. But also the idea is that they're more practical, or they make more sense. You know, if you look at places that have updated their zoning code to a form-based code, you see are zones that are called, you know, like we have neighborhood conservation, NC. You know, there might be like neighborhood zone mixed use, or neighborhood zone residential, or downtown zone, you know, mixed use or something, you know, but like they're very specific to the location where they are, their context, you know. And so that's I guess another aspect of simplification, is just being more intuitive about it.
Eric, is part of it also, I mean, sometimes we have standards that just don't make sense for the area in which they're developing. Like, you need to be 10 feet, you're 9.5, so you got to go through a variance. That's a step. Is that really necessary? I mean, is there much of a difference between 9.5 and 10.5 feet? You know,
I couldn't agree with you more, that there's probably some things in our current, you know, I mean, there are things that go to like the Board of Appeals, you know, because they're, you know, a couple feet off, or, I mean, there's probably some way of simplifying that too, so that our staff can make a determination there, you know, that it's fulfilling the intent, you know.
That's why some zoning ordinances are going to guidelines rather than standards.
Yeah.
Allow flexibility, because if you want to promote development, I mean, if you got to send somebody through the Board of Zoning Appeals, that's extra money, it's extra time, and it's uncertainty too. So those are all things.
Yeah. 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 I mean, I came across an example of there was a workforce housing it was a duplex, I think off of West Street, Lafayette, maybe. It was an existing duplex. The owner wanted to essentially rebuild the entire structure exactly as it is, but renovated. So it would be a lot nicer, but still be essentially workforce housing. It was not up to its current code in terms of its setbacks. And so the rebuilt structure would still be not up to code, but it was just it was a very minimal thing, you know, it was like one of the side setbacks or something. And, you know, but and the staff at the time, approved it, or, you know, basically recommended that it, you know, it should be approved. And then it didn't get through the Board of Appeals. And, you know, and so that was, to me, that was an example of, well, there's some things holding up this type of housing that I think we could simplify, you know, that's, and some of that might be in, you know, these kind of, what might be deemed, you know, relatively minor aberrations, you know, in the code. Staff.
That's why what Terry just
Yeah.
said is going on now, which is guidelines instead of standards or requirements, may
Yeah.
make some sense. So that
Yeah,
you don't have something set in concrete that people
Yeah,
feel they
I
have
think-
to.
Yeah.
Well, it's especially hard for older areas to develop prior to zoning standards. Then they put zoning standards over it that don't relate to what's on the ground. It's really more meant for new
Right.
development, and it just creates all sorts of problems. So, sorry about that.
Yeah,
So,
that's a good point.
Anyway,
Yeah.
All right, well, so, the final question about your goals, which is probably the most sensitive amongst them, is the reference to increasing density in R3 and R4. What do you want to say about that, or what, you know, can you kind of talk about that a little bit, what your thoughts are there? I mean, you know, you did a nice description about what you mean to better match the vibrant activity level that's within those districts, which I think makes sense. But is there, you know, as we're thinking about that, is there any, do you want to convey any messages to us about how we should be thinking about that? Or
Well, I think that it would probably be helpful for us to share. Our office could do this. We probably should share a map with you guys that shows where the R3 and R4 zones are. And you could maybe drill down to those locations and, you know, just basically see if I would say whatever additional density we suggest or might be appropriate, it's not going to be the same for R3 and R4, and it might not even be the same across those districts. But I think that there are some unique context advantages to a lot of those locations in terms of infrastructure and proximities that help make the case for additional density. I think that I used the example of Admiral Farragut earlier, you know, and I think there are, the way I think about it, it's the pattern of development that we saw 40 years ago, you know, when a number of these developments were built, is not, it's very suburban, you know, it's not, and the way that they use their common areas is, I would say, there's a lot of space that to me doesn't seem well utilized. You know, it's very resource intensive, you know, like a lot of lawn that is just watered and nobody really uses it. And it's not like they're not dedicated recreation areas, you know, and I just can't help but think that if some of these existing multifamily developments were redesigned today, they would be much more efficient in the way they use their space and could accommodate additional units. Yeah, obviously that we have to be considering, you know, cars and, but the whole idea with a lot of these, you know, multifamily developments and where they're located is that, you know, we try to incentivize people who don't need to have a car to live there, you know, and so that's part of it as well. I can't provide additional, we don't have any specific idea on what additional density would mean in those places, but I think it's just we're gonna have to study those, what currently is in the R3 and R4 and the, the sort of range and the context that they exist in. I mean, that's really what's going to determine what's appropriate. But I think
we have the zoning maps. I mean, Teresa, you
yeah,
printed,
okay,
I think,
Yeah.
we have
Okay.
it, so we can,
okay,
yeah.
okay, that's good.
Yeah, and
But-
that's gonna be, I mean, no doubt, that's gonna be a tough one. And I think it makes sense to really understand what's there and what to really evaluate what could be possible.
Yeah, and I just what I find in conversations that I have with residents is that there could be more nuance. Maybe that's an understatement in terms of people's understanding of what it like sort of that mid-level of density looks like or could be. It's like the town center is really not going to happen in Annapolis. That's where it is for a reason. That's what everybody sort of identifies with density, unfortunately, and that's just not realistic anywhere in Annapolis, in my opinion. And so I would love for people to sort of start looking at some examples of density in Annapolis that make sense currently. That might be models or from other places where things just kind of fit together well. And but
Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
density could be a scary word, right? So
I
it
know.
means it's like a 4-letter word, right? It means different things to
It
different
is.
people. So
But
It
it
is,
is interesting that developers are buying, like I was talking to a friend, Admiral Heights, developers are buying 2 lots and subdividing into 3. They're building 3 houses. So it's happening. It's happening whether we know or not. It's just that housing, I don't think would be considered affordable that they're putting up there.
Right.
So,
Right.
Yeah, in our
right.
neighborhood, there was 1 lot that now has 5 houses on it,
yeah.
5 very large houses on it.
Yeah, that's the issue.
Bill Chance property was,
Oh, yeah.
and not affordable. I'm sure they were well over $600,000 or $700,000.
it's is there anything else about zoning, Terry or Nancy, that we wanted to kind of dig in?
I don't think so. I had a question on a totally other subject. So, which is
Go ahead. Go
I'm
ahead.
interested in the whole notion of the annexing of property and what that would entail and what the city is thinking of, what the plan envisions in doing that.
Yeah, it mentions that growth priority growth site. I was wondering 82.6 acres, I think. I was wondering where that
Yeah.
was. Yeah.
Well, I don't think, is it 82.6 acres in one location?
I don't know. It was that was a line in one of your goals.
That's what I was just curious about, that whole concept of annexation.
Yeah, it's pretty complicated. I'm not sure I actually understand everything that's involved in annexing. But what I can tell you is that it's a mutual agreement between the city and the county. And it pretty much just frequently comes down to a property owner or a developer that wants to be on the city's water system. I mean, that's really what drives it. It's far cheaper and to be on the city's water, and just there are examples of properties outside of city limits that are on the city water, and so that really just basically removes them from consideration for annexation, because they have what they want and they're done, and that was just negotiated. So I think that there's a very few number of parcels that are make sense for annexation, or that are we essentially look at the parcels that are along Route 2. There's a portion at Route 2 and Route 50, kind of just north of Hudson Street. There's a few remaining parcels along Route 2 south of Forest Drive. There was a big annexation there a few years ago, you may be familiar with, that led to some townhouses. And then there are some areas on Bay Ridge Road that you're probably familiar with. And then finally, there's a sort of an odd inholding off of Edgewood Road in an area called Carrs Manor that was not in the annexation area, the growth area in the last comp plan, but I think maybe added in this current one. It's a group of houses that I don't remember the whole story, but a portion of them are consolidated into one owner, and then there's a bunch of single owner lots. And I think, yeah, the challenge is always, somebody's got to pay to have the work done to connect to the city water and the infrastructure costs, and the city doesn't foot that bill. And, so it's just, when it's not an easy hookup, that's basically where it gets pretty challenging. But those properties along Solomon's Island Road, those are properties that, there are some shopping centers that are partially in the city, and I don't know the history of those, but those are the ones that I think just makes a ton of sense for those. I mean, I think the city line should go up to Route 2. Just don't know. I don't know why that is, but we want to set a high standard, I think, for anything that comes in that's annexed, and really, I think that those are opportunities to require workforce housing, at least in some portion.
Sure, because at least then you'd have some leverage that.
Yeah, for sure.
Is workforce defined in the plan, what workforce housing is? No.
It will
No,
be.
not-
No,
Okay.
it's not currently. And
Okay.
we tried to catch a bunch of terms in this. We're going to have a glossary in the comp plan, and so that'll definitely be in there.
Yeah, I was just lamenting that people think affordable housing means low income housing. They don't understand the concept,
Yeah, we have to nip that in the bud. I mean, that is a so we
But if it's defined in the plan, it's not an issue.
right. It will be. Yeah, it'll be defined, and yeah,
Well,
it's just it is a nagging thing that we don't. There's not it's complicated, obviously, but we want to be pretty specific about what we mean by these terms. In the
Yeah,
comp plan.
we're running out of terms a little bit. Affordable housing now has, negative connotations to so many people.
Yeah.
Tara, you forwarded a great article about the pitfalls of workforce housing. The problem with
Right.
calling workforce housing when you're making reference to more that middle income level is that it connotes that people of low income don't work. And that's not the case. I mean, you can have a full-time job at a minimum wage and you're low income and you're working full-time. So, the term workforce housing isn't really fair either. I like the idea of talking about increasing housing options. Because that's
what I end up falling back to a lot. I think that I agree. It's because it's, and I also say, lowercase a affordable housing or market affordable housing, where it's just providing options for people that don't need a single family house or, that.
Yeah, I
And
guess
then-
the only problem with that is that a lot of the new stuff that's coming into the city is really expensive, no matter what density it is. So
No,
I
it's-
think
that's
it
true.
really is, it's housing, affordability options really, or something, It really has to do with people can afford.
And we discovered that Montgomery County now is using the term attainable housing.
That's right. That's right. You shared that with me after the last call.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think everyone's just struggling now in this field, kind of what to call it.
But
So I just,
I know
That would be a
Dewan
good-
likes,
you guys, I think that might be a worthwhile task if you're open to it. I mean, is to sort of help define these terms, or which ones need to be front and center. I mean, that would be helpful. I mean, I wouldn't mind if you guys were interested in taking on something like that on, but
sure.
yeah.
I do have just one other question for you, Eric. So I noticed in the comp plan, you make reference to the MPDU program and reevaluating the program. And that was kind of the first time I had heard that from you. And so what are you thinking? What are you thinking about there?
Well, it might be in tandem with this idea of having some requirement in the plan development, or just basically finding a way to create more MPDUs. I mean, we have created, Teresa has the number, what is it, like 11, or I don't know how many, 18 or something, but it's just not leading to that many units. But the current policy seems, pretty reasable.
Well, it changed though. I mean,
Yeah.
see,
I
it
know
already got redone.
Well, I
Because
know a lot of the,
that it wasn't working was because of, people were, because of the density bonus and not being able to use the density bonus, they got to do a fee in lieu. So probably if that hadn't been in there, we would have probably maybe 2 or 3 times the number of MPDUs that we have. But now that's been taken out and now they have to
Gotcha.
develop the MPDUs. So, but we haven't seen what happens with that yet.
I see. So that recommendation might not be necessary. I see what you're
Well,
saying.
well, actually, what I thought you were going to say, and one thing that we did talk about is requiring the MPDUs for developments that are fewer than 10 units. Right?
Well,
'Cause
we
it's-
do.
it-
Oh, yeah,
and I believe-
we don't.
no, you don't. Yeah.
Yeah. So when we talked about the plan development, if there's something coming in, I don't know. Okay. but
That
it was-
was, I did look at a lot of our counterparts across the state that have MPDU legislation, and theirs is more, like it's 25 or more. So we're like the lowest of the ones that I looked at 10.
okay.
That's because this mostly now the size of the new developments is much smaller than in many other areas because we don't have any land because we have so little developable land. So
So that's interesting. I mean, I was curious about that. I mean, I was sympathetic to what you're saying, Teresa, about wanting to give the updated policy a chance, but I think that we had kind of approached it from this, well, is one unit for every 10. Is that what it is? That may not be enough. Or,
Well, yeah, I mean, like if they were developing 9, how many MPDUs would we say, no matter how many you're doing, you have to produce 1 MPDU?
right.
I mean,
Right.
that's what, going below 10, that's what you would be
Yeah.
doing,
That's right.
because it's 15% of.
Well, I think we're also talking about with the mixed use zoning that you labeled as a housing priority, that, could be possible to require MPDUs
Right.
there.
Right.
regardless
For
of the
sure.
size of the development.
Yeah.
For sure.
So something
Yeah.
like that maybe could be a,
Could you say that again?
So when Eric was talking about the mixed use zoning, he had like the 6 different types of mixed use zoning
Right.
types, and one of them was housing priority. Am I remembering that right? And I thought what we had talked about was focusing on MPDUs and those housing priority mixed use zonings.
That's definitely going to be part of the discussion there. I mean, it's not just
And
going to be about adding more density. It'll be like, well, what do we get with that? You know, it's
Right, and so then maybe that's not an amendment to the MPDU program as it is a zone, it's part of the zoning ordinance. I mean, I don't know how you get at it, so.
yeah. So maybe that action actually gets redrafted to be, you know, simply just explore other ways of requiring, you know, MPDUs in other
Right,
additional development types or something. But
right,
yeah.
okay. Terry and Nancy, anything else?
No,
There's a lot in the
So-
comp plan to digest, so I'm
Yeah.
sure, I'm sure
So-
no one's gonna read it.
So
Yeah.
were you gonna go through the housing ones or no? Just
No,
the-
actually, you know, so a lot, the ones that we went through, I feel like they're sort of repeated, or they're, right? Am I wrong about that? That, you know, the ones that we went through, I think were already in the housing.
Yeah, there is a lot of overlap, I would say, between the land use, municipal growth, and housing. I think the housing ones, there's a little bit more specifics in there, but I think the intents are all kind of overlapping.
Yeah, I mean.
Yeah.
And when you talk about creating housing for the 80%, 120% income, you know, I think we've already had that you know, we know what.
Yeah.
I think what you mean by that is that the housing typology of the duplexes and triplexes is probably the best way to get at that.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
definitely.
I think a combination between the conversations we had last time, you know, and sort of the repetitiveness of some of the goals, I think we got them all covered. But if we didn't, we will be sure and let you know.
Okay.
just one quick question. So what I was talking about at the beginning were the performance metrics under the housing goal 1. The percentage of total households that are severely cost burdened is reduced by 10% by 2040. And then the percent of total homeowner households that are severely cost burdened is going to be reduced to 6.5%. I just wondered what those percentages were now.
Yeah, from what?
Good
Yeah.
question. I don't have those numbers in front of me.
Are
Okay.
they in the consolidated plan?
They
Yeah,
might be, but I was
they
just
came-
reading this. I just thought, you know, I thought I'd ask.
No, they those metrics refer directly back to the consolidated plan.
Okay, so that's from the
you know,
consolidated one. Okay, all right.
Yeah.
All right.
It probably would be good to incorporate, you know, into this what it is now, just so.
It's true. It's
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the problem with just looking at the goals and matching. There's
Yeah.
no
Right.
introduction that gives you all that background. So it's
Yeah.
somewhere, I know, just not here.
Right.
I'll look it up.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Sure.
Thank you, Eric. We appreciate the repeat performance.
Well, this is this is definitely a central component of the comprehensive plan. I mean,
Right.
I think I've probably 30% of my time is spent focused on this, on housing related stuff. So I appreciate the rigor of the conversation here for sure.
So can you tell us again, so what's the timing for hiring? Who'd you say you were going to use? Santec? The consultant?
Stantec. Yeah.
Stantec.
Their office is in Arlington, Virginia. Well, so they've already been under contract with us for the last year and a half, but and they were the primary consultant on the West Annapolis master plan work. So I don't have a definite date set, but we're going to have a kickoff probably mid-July for that. And there will be some public workshop type events and some outreach as part of that. It's definitely not going to be done just behind closed doors. I mean, we have some focus group related work as part of that. You know, we want to connect with a kind of cross section of people that are both impacted and familiar with development in the city, you know, and
Do you have a scope of work?
we do.
with
Yeah.
them that you could share?
Yeah, I could share that. Sure.
That,
Um,
okay. That would be good just to understand what they're,
Mhm.
because they're going to be focusing on zoning,
Yep,
right? Yeah,
yep.
and so I think it'd be good for us to understand exactly what they're being asked to do.
Yep.
Right.
Sure. Yeah, no problem. I'm happy to share that. I can do that tomorrow. I'll forward that to Teresa. Yeah. But I'm excited about that because I mean, the city has really been talking about mixed use zoning for 40 years. I mean, you go back to every comprehensive plan and it's just talked about in sort of similar ways. And we've made some inroads there. I think the MX zone that really defined Inner West Street has been very successful, but we haven't really attack the issue, you know, in a broad way. So a lot of the same places in every comprehensive plan are identified as these potential mixed use centers, clusters, centers. So we're trying to advance that.
And then, final question, which might be a tough one, is, I know that you were working on a fiscal impact study in conjunction with the comp plan. Is that still in
What
the
were
midst of occurring?
Well, so we did a fiscal impact study last year, and it was based on a pretty conservative population projection that came from the Baltimore Metropolitan Council. And it was really, it was not even, it was way under what the trend has been. And it was, I think it was largely based on, you know, essentially the fact the city is considered kind of built out, but it's not, it didn't really go into much depth. And we looked at the trends, and this is something else I could share with you guys that, well, it's in those exhibits under the municipal growth section of the comp plan website, but we provide some slides that kind of show the methodology. But we looked at the trends and we established, we think is a reasonable projection on new households in the city. And some of it is, it's basically a combination of what's in the pipeline, which is a combination of things, projects that are already under review or permitted, and the zoning capacity. And then we have a kind of speculative addition to that, which is just based on plan priorities, you know, the growth of affordable housing, and that would, if we're successful in producing more affordable units, that would expand the new households. But so what we came to, it's essentially approximately 1,500 new households in the next 20 years. And you know, it's I wouldn't say it's an aggressive number by any means. I mean, it's just it's kind of
So-
looking at historic trends and what we're capable of producing.
Well, are you updating the BAE report?
Yeah.
that
Oh
was
yeah. So,
issued
sorry.
last
Yeah.
summer?
Yeah. So what BAE is doing is updating. They're providing like a PowerPoint update. They're going to be they're basically updating their charts with the new projection in kind of a presentation format, and essentially producing the work that would go into the comprehensive plan. So they're not doing another kind of like report, because the methodology is basically the same. They're just replacing a lot of the numbers and drawing some new conclusions. So that is something that I'm actually expected to have in the next couple of weeks, and I think we'll probably give a presentation to the council and or maybe just economic matters. Yeah.
Well, it's an important go along with all this, you know.
Yeah,
for
yeah.
Folks to understand, so.
Yeah. So that's how we're tackling that.
Okay. All right.
All right.
Well, unless there's anything else, I guess. Thank you, Eric. We
Sure.
appreciate it.
Thank you guys. I appreciate
Very
it.
much, very much. And
Sure.
if I can have a motion to adjourn, Nancy and Terry, unless there's anything else you want to discuss or talk about. All right. Is there a motion to adjourn? Give me a
I move
thumbs up.
to adjourn.
So moved.
Okay. All right. All right. Sounds good. Thanks, guys.
All
All right. We'll talk to you later then.
Take
You've
care.
reached my dog's tolerance.